All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to our Zoom Shabbos, pre-Shabbos Shuva Drasha. It's a pleasure to see all of you. I would offer you a drink of soda, but I don't think you could do that. A glass of soda. I don't think you could do that over Zoom. Okay. Tonight I'm going to do something very radical. You know, people have been asking me for months, why do we have this pandemic? Why are so many people ill? Why so many people passed away? And why do we have all the social turmoil in society today? And I've consistently said that I'm not a Navi, and the only way, I'm not a prophet, and the only way you could know why all these things are happening is if you have prophecy. No angels have spoken to me, and when I sleep at night, I don't have a mystical dream, so I don't have any inside information. However, while preparing for Shabbos Shuva, and I thought about this issue a great deal, and you'll see how it weaves into my drasha, I figured out the reason why we have the pandemic, and I'm going to share that with you tonight. Okay, and in all sincerity, I don't know that this is the real reason, but I think it's plausible to the extent that even if it's not the reason why, we can't assume why God does things, but you'll see, I think the point that I'm making is valid anyway, even if it's not the actual reason for the pandemic. So here's my thoughts. When I was, somebody that came back from Israel told me that they were quarantined for 2 weeks in Israel. And they told me they were in bidud. And I had never heard the word bidud before. And I thought that's a fascinating word. And it comes straight from the Chumash. In the Chumash, it doesn't say bidud, it says, by a mitzorah, kol yemei asher hanegabo tamei tamehu. The entire time that he has the affliction, he's impure. Badad yeshev michutz lemachan mashavo. He has to sit in isolation outside the camp. So badad means to be isolated or to be quarantined. He has to leave the camp and he's quarantined. So the badad yeshev, badad here is an adverb. So in Israel they changed it to a noun. Bidud, state of being quarantined, is a person is in quarantine. He's in the state of bidud. Now Rashi says, why was there bidud? Why did the mitzvah have to go chutz l'machana? So Rashi says, Amar Rabbi Seinu ma nishtana mishar tameim leishe badad. Other people who are tamei don't have to go out of the camp. Why does he have to sit by himself in isolation? Since he caused division between people, he created machlokes with his lashon hara. So afu yibadal. So he also has to be isolated. And I would just extend that a little bit and say that he needs to have a taste of his own medicine. He has to see what it's like to destroy relationships and what the impact is on other people when they have to be in isolation. He has to experience it himself. So what I would like to suggest is the world, is falling apart. It's not only the pandemic, but after a few months ago when George Floyd was killed, so that unleashed violent eruption of rage and anger and looting and rioting and toppling statues and icons. And the crime rate is now unprecedented, and there's people advocating to either get rid of the police or to defund the police. And it's a mistake to think that all this anger came only from the policeman killing George Floyd. This is really a continuation of a process that's been going on in America for the last few years that I find, I'm sure everybody else finds, enormously disturbing. And that is that society is plagued by tremendous anger, this polarization, demonization, vilification, deprecation, mudslinging, and that is it has become the standard in our society. Although maybe it's the most predominant in the political arena, but it's a mistake to blame it on Donald Trump because and the battle between the Republicans and the Democrats as we're moving closer to an election, because this has been going on even before this administration. There's this battle between the left and the right, between the conservatives and the liberals, between people who are patriotic and people who think that America was built on evil. And now that we have, and now that Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, so now there's going to be another tremendous fight over who's going to succeed her. So that's like the and there's all sorts of threats that if you do this, you do that, and there people are already protesting and being hostile. Facilitating all this is an enormous amount of intolerance. There's you can't discuss with people your opinion. It's especially true on college campuses where if you try to express an opinion that's different than the opinion that the professor holds or the student body holds, they will throw you out. I was taught as a little boy in America, growing up in America, that this is the land of freedom and tolerance. I remember my teacher made a big deal about tolerance, such an amazing thing that we have here in America. There's very little tolerance left in America, or if any. So we're witnessing, in combination with the pandemic, which has caused the death of over 1 million people, and the economies have suffered enormously, and people have lost their income. And so in addition to the pandemic, we have a tremendous amount of social upheaval, which has resulted, I'm going to break it down into 3 categories. There's polarization, fighting between people. They don't fight about ideas. They fight about, they take sides against each other. So there's a lack of achdus in our society. There's demonization and denigration. So there's a lack of kavod. The people do not, it's the antithesis of kavod. The people do not show kavod one to the other. And finally, there's extreme intolerance. It's become fanatical and radical. So tolerance, the Hebrew word for tolerance is savlanos. So there's those 3 areas. There's no achdus, there's no kavod, and there's no savlanos. So my theory is that tragedy unites people. Tragedy brings people together. When the 9/11 took place, those of you that are old enough to remember, American society joined together. It was an amazing thing to see how people embraced each other and worked with each other and showed a great deal of care and concern and camaraderie, and there was very strong patriotism. So the pandemic should have had the same effect. It should have united the people. And unfortunately, it accomplished very little. But my thought was that perhaps the Ribono Shalom brought the pandemic so that we should be in a state of bidud, we should be quarantined, and just like the Nazir is in bidud because he doesn't appreciate other people and he destroys relationships. So similarly, in our society, because there is so many relations, there's so much anger and hatred and hostility and demonization and polarization. So the Ribono Shalom brought the pandemic, so we should be isolated. We should see what it's like to be away from people. And indeed, people now we're not in quarantine, most of us, but it was enormously difficult for people. And it gave them a taste of what it's like to be isolated from people and to have relationships severed. And I would have hoped that that would have been a lasting lesson to mankind, that the importance of relationships, and we're all human beings and we're all to be together. And then one more point is that we're wearing masks, and Lashon Hara was the bidud was because of Lashon Hara for the Mitzvah, because that's what causes saras. He speaks Lashon Hara. So a mask is a good way of stopping people from engaging in Lashon Hara. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that well because you could talk through the mask. But it's perhaps a divine reminder that you should be careful what you say. So that was my theory, that the Ribono Shel Olam brought the pandemic because society is falling apart. It's just there's an enormous rupture in society. People are angry and they hate each other, and they're violent. It's not only just words; it's physical, and there's rioting and there's looting. So maybe the Ribono Shel Olam brought the pandemic so that people should feel a sense of unity, and that people should have an appreciation of what it's like to be isolated from other people. So the thing is that, as you all know, the hatred and the hostility is unabated. So you might say that if that was the plan, it didn't work. So I'm going to suggest, as we get towards the end of the drasha, I'm going to suggest that perhaps the plan did work, and it was not for naught that we went through this whole process. There's a famous Mishnah in Maseches Rosh Hashanah, and this is what I'm going to focus on tonight. The Mishnah says, I forgot to underline it, but for Rosh Hashanah, Kol B'ay Olam Ovim L'fanav Kidei Moron. On Rosh Hashanah, all people pass before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like the Bnei Moron. And the question is, what does it mean, Bnei Moron? What is a Moron? So the Gemara asked that question. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Ches. My Kivnei Moron. What is a Moron? What does it mean? So the Gemara says, Hacha Targimo Kivnei Imrana. In Bavel, they translated Moron as sheep. That so Rashi explains, what does it have to do with sheep? The Rashi says, Kavasim, Shemonim Osang Asran, Biyotzim Ze'achar Zeh, Bepesach Katan Shein Yichol Ngotzeis Keachad. When in Israel, the halacha is that every 10th sheep you have to give for Meiser. So how do you know which is every 10th? So you have the cat or the sheep walk through out of the pen one at a time, and the owner of that flock counts 1, 2, 3. When he gets up to 10, then he identifies that one as the one that's for Meiser. So the sheep that go out when they emerge from the Pesach, from the door or from the gate, they're going one at a time. So that's the first explanation of Kinei Moron, that when God judges man, it's everybody by himself, just like the sheep walking out of the gate. Then the Gemara says the second explanation. It's like the heights of Moron. And Rashi says Moron was an elevated place, and a derech kotzer. It was very narrow. And 2 people can't walk together. There's a deep valley on either side. And if you have 2 people walking together, if one of them falls off or pushes the other, he will fall to his death in the valley. So therefore, it's one at a time. So that's the explanation of Rish Lakish, who lived in Eretz Yisrael. Rish Lakish said that Moron, not sheep, Moron is these heights where there was a very narrow passageway, and there is a steep drop on either side. And then the Gemara says a third explanation. Yehuda Amar Shmuel K'chayalo Shabbeis David. It's like the army of David. And Rashi says, what does that mean? The moron is like the soldiers of a king, and because the word moron, Lashon Mardis the Adnas, moron implies to be the word moros means authority and Adnas. And b'kacha yumonim osam yotzim ze'achar zeh b'tzeisam l'chama. When the soldiers would go to war, they would count them one by one as they would pass. The officer who was in charge, and I would add, as they passed, they gave them their assignments. So there also they went one at a time. So those are the 3 explanations. The sheep go one at a time out of the door. They pass on the on this high slope one at a time, or the soldiers go one at a time. So there has been an enormous amount of material written on these explanations. The obvious question is, why do I need 3 mishalim? And why do I need any mashal? Why does the Mishnah have to say that on Rosh Hashanah, all the people in the world pass like B'nai Moron, whichever one of the 3 morons you want, whatever it means. But why do I have to know? It's simple. They went single file, they go one at a time before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is that necessary? Then the Gemara says also, the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Rav Yochanan v'chulin niskar b'skir achas. They're all judged in one sweep. HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges everybody together. So this seems very strange. If he first we said he judges everybody by themselves. Now he's saying, now the Gemara is saying that they're all judged together. So which one is it? Is it everybody together, or is it one at a time? So as I say, you could gather together all the drashas that have been said on this piece of Gemara, and you can make 10 svarim, if not more. So here's my thought that I want to add to the explanation for this Mishnah. It would seem to me as follows. First off, let's explain why is it necessary to have, if God judges one at a time, so what does it mean that he's judging everybody at one time? So I would suggest that it means that there are 2 judgments going on simultaneously, because human beings are created as individuals and everybody has their own identity, but at the same time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man to be part of society. People don't live by themselves. Somebody that's a hermit is usually unstable. People are we're social beings. People need to have other people together with them, and we are part of a society. We are social in terms of families that we build. We're part of a community. We live in a city. We belong to a state. We identify with a country, and we're part of humanity. So that's the social dimension of man. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges people, so in some societies, the only thing that's important is the state. In socialist or communist societies, the individual is not important. In other societies, the individual is everything. In America, they say it's the me generation, where people, and they don't even care about the state anymore. They treat it with disdain. So neither one of those approaches is good because they're not balanced. You need the synthesis of those 2. You need that a person should be an individual, a yachid, and at the same time, you should be part of the tzibur. And that's why in Yahadus, the concept of tzibur is so important. We daven with the tzibur. There's many other mitzvahs that are done by tzibur. Certain mitzvahs we do by ourselves, and other mitzvahs we do with the tzibur. So since man exists on 2 planes, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges a person in those 2 ways. First, it's simultaneous, but then the first is that God judges the person as an individual. What have you accomplished? What have you been doing? What type of life are you living? And then God judges the tzibur. He judges mankind, and every person is part of the tzibur. Maybe God judges the tzibur in a variety of ways. Maybe he judges the tzibur of the members of a shul. What kind of tzibur is that? Or the members of a household, or the members of a yeshiva, or the members of a city. But he also, he judges a whole country, and he judges all of humanity, all of mankind, to see how they're doing. And so you'll say, well, what does mankind have to do with me? Well, the answer is because mankind is made up of all the individual people. You can't, it's true that no one person can be held responsible for everything, but it's the total combination of all the individuals. And therefore, God judges us in both ways. He judges us as individuals, and he judges us as part of the tzibur. And that's why there's 2 separate judgments taking place. So what I want to suggest is that these 3 mishalim, that these 3 explanations for moron are explanations of they're examples of these of a duality of a yachid and a tzibur operating at the same time. And I also would suggest that these three mishalim address the points that I made before. It's not my own points, but whatever it was obvious is that our society suffers from three different areas, and these three areas are the basis for any relationship, and that is that there's a lack of unity. You can't have a relationship unless there's achdus, and then you can't have a relationship without mutual respect. And then sometimes people, even if there's unity and respect, sometimes people hurt each other inadvertently. They do something, nobody's perfect, so you have to have tolerance. Those are the three elements that are necessary for a society to exist. Those are the three elements that are totally missing in our society today. There's no tolerance, there's no respect, and there's no unity. Everything is shattered. But those are the three elements of society. And I'm going to share with you how each one of these three explanations of the Mishnah reflects a different theme of the importance of in society. In other words, if the Mishnah if the din of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is both on the individual and on society, so there's three types of societies, or the three different aspects of society that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is considering. So the first example, the first explanation is that Kibnei Moron means like sheep. I saw a number of Mefarshim ask, why do they use sheep? Why not cattle? Cattle also, you could have cattle that go one at a time, and when they come out of the pen, you designate them for the 10th cattle. Why is it only sheep? So after consulting with Mr. Google or Mrs. Google, I discovered that lambs are from the most sociable animals. Animals have a very strong flocking instinct, and each follows the lamb or sheep in front of them. That's why you have the expression that they went like sheep to the slaughter, because lambs, they don't go and do their own thing. Each lamb goes together with the rest of the herd. And if you isolate a lamb, then the lamb gets nervous, because lambs don't like to be alone. They're social animals with a very strong flocking instinct. And therefore, the reason why lambs was selected, or sheep, is because the point of Kinei Moron, if you say that it refers to a herd of lamb, is that on the one hand, you have the element of tzibur that is represented by the lambs, and people are like a tzibur of sheep. There's a pasuk in Tanakh. I'm not going to scroll down, but it's on Kadashim, the holy flock, which is an expression of imagery of Klal Yisrael, that they are the holy sheep. So sheep represents the idea of unity, how everybody is unified together. And that's one dimension of judgment, is how's the flock doing? How is the unity? Is it intact? Do they have the strong flocking instinct that mankind that they're supposed to have? Because if animals can have it, human beings certainly should have it. Or is society splintered, as unfortunately it is today, and polarized? So that's, on the one hand, the sheep the lambs are beautiful mashal of society, of sticking together. At the same time, there's always a concern when you have a tzibur that the individual will be lost, and that he won't be able to excel, or he or she won't excel, because they'd be swallowed up, what we call batal b'rashishim. They're nullified in 60 parts. They lose their identity. So it's important whenever you have a tzibur, at the same time, to emphasize the importance of the yachid, and to find ways that the yachid could express himself. We have a tzibur for davening, but we have a shliach tzibur that leads the davening, and a balkare leads the laning. We never want to to overlook the individual within the tzibur. So the mashal is that even with sheep, you could isolate a single sheep as it walks out of the gate, and you could make it holy. You could sanctify it. If it's the 10th sheep, it becomes holy, and that reflects this idea that even though there's a tzibur, there's a society, everybody is unified, but the individual could excel in any event. So that's the first explanation, and this interestingly, this Mishnah refers to not only to Jews, but it refers to non-Jews as well, because it says Kol Ba'alei Olam, everybody who's come to the world. That includes everybody. It includes Jews and non-Jews together. In the Rosh Hashanah, Kippur davening, it says V'yosu kulam aguda achas lasol tzorcha b'lei b'shalom, that we pray for the time when everybody will be an aguda achas. There'll be one aguda. There'll be one unified group of people. What does it mean aguda achas? It means there'll be a unified society, the antithesis of what we have in our society today. So the non-Jewish world, where the mashal is that people are supposed to be like sheep, that they have, and the sheep are pure. If you ever see pictures or you look at a sheep, they have a sweet, they don't have any anger and they don't have any jealousy. They're just sweet animals. So that's how society needs to be in terms of achdus, that people should be united. They should be aguda achas, and Klal Yisrael has an even greater level of Kol Yisrael Revim Zelazeh, that they are even more unified than the rest of society. But even mankind in general, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking to see how well did you do this past year. How much did you is the mashal of sheep, Kibdei Imra, how much is that reflected in your behavior in society? So that's the first. So God judges on both dimensions. How is the individual? What did he do? And then how did society behave itself? Unfortunately, society today is behaving terribly poorly. The Chafetz Chaim often quotes, in a number of places, he quotes a Yushalmi that says, Amar Rav Abba, Drasha David Klum Sadikim Hayu, I have to take off my glasses. All the people in David's army were tzaddikim. He only used tzaddikim in his army. But nonetheless, when they went to war, many of the soldiers died. Achav was an evil king. He put the avodah zaros all over. He murdered the Nevi'im. He was a Rasha. Nonetheless, of the avodah zaros, and there was nobody that spoke Lashon Hara, and they didn't stab each other in the back. And when they went to war, they were victorious, and nobody died. So you see the enormous importance of tzibur, of unity, of achdus, of people of shalom, of people working together. That even though David's army was all tzaddikim, and Achav's army, they were all the avodas idol worshippers. Nonetheless, you see that it trumps the. I'm sorry for the no pun, but the ability to live in shalom and achdus is above everything else. And the Chafetz Chaim says often, because the Jewish people are God's children. We're the children of God. And no parent can tolerate watching children fight and bicker and get angry and bickering over little tiny and silly things, or getting into major battles where they stop talking to each other and they harm each other. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he sees that his children are living in unity, that's the greatest nachas for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The second mashal is that of the people who walk on this peak of moron, and they have to walk single file so that they should not fall down. So what I would suggest is that the point of this mashal is that this is a reflection of the quality of tolerance that is a second essential element in society. Society needs tolerance, unity, and respect. So tolerance is an essential element. When the people walk on the peak, if everybody's going to run there and say me first, if everybody's going to grab, if everybody's going to be intolerant to the other person who's ahead of them and push them aside, then you'll have a lot of dead bodies falling off the slope or off the peak. By inherently, it requires that people should give each other space. And that's what tolerance is. Tolerance means to give somebody else space. If they're having a bad day, or if they say something nasty to you, or they're grumpy, not to become irate and yell at them and scream at them, or to decide, I don't want to have anything to do with this person. That's the midah of savlanos. Revolbi has the most magnificent description of savlanos. He says, Umau savlanos. What is savlanos? A savlan doma mamish ladam hanose masakaved. A savlan is like a porter who carries heavy. A porter is called a sabol, who's carrying heavy packages. V'afshu kaved lo mamshich leches bedarko ve'einanilo l'seiso. He doesn't eat, no matter how heavy it is. He keeps on carrying the suitcases and the packages. That's how it is in all relationships. On the road, we hear things that we don't agree with, like on the college campuses, there are things that are said that we have a different opinion. We maintain close relationships. And then I don't have enough time to read the whole thing. If you want, I'll share with you later. But he says, even if the person insults you, if you have savlanis, so that's like, the burden becomes a little bit heavier. So somebody with savlanis carries it even when it's heavier. And he says, the relationships are not unintentional relationships or random relationships. A person is the product of society. And chaver nosei es chavero. Chaverim carry each other, and they carry the burden. Whatever the person is doing, he goes on to say, it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they say, and you certainly ought to tell them that I don't agree. And it doesn't mean that if the person did something wrong, you should just close your eyes. You should tell them that this is inappropriate, but it should be said in a nice way and in a way that's not insulting, and in that way, without anger, because the opposite of savlanas is anger, and the savlan does not display anger, and that's what we're in society today. We're so far removed from savlanas, it's unbelievable, and all the rage and the anger and the looting and the rioting, when people are disgruntled or upset. I mean, I'm not saying that there are not things that they should be upset about. There are certain injustices that definitely need to be addressed and corrected. But when people lose themselves and there's anarchy and there's violence and they harm innocent people and there's rage and anger and it continues, the fire is burning for weeks on end, that's the antithesis of savlanas. So the second mashal teaches that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he examines mankind, he examines the savlanas that people have. Just like when people are walking on that perch, they have to be one at a time. You give the other person his space. You can't push him aside. So that's the second thing that God examines about society, to see how they're doing. And that mashal reflects both aspects, that sometimes a person has to walk alone. In the mashal of the sheep, it's that the sheep go out of the door alone. In the second mashal of the perch, it's that there are times when they have to walk alone, but they need the moral support of the rest of society. And savlanas is enormously important, not only for society at large, but on a smaller scale in marriages. You can't have a happy marriage if there's no savlanas. So husbands and wives, parents, children, they can't live without savlanas. A boss has to have savlanas. If he wants his staff to be happy, and he wants to treat them in a proper way. And without savlanas, what happens is that people literally throw each other off the cliff, and they kill one another. So that's the second element of the Mishnah. The third explanation is the soldiers of Beis David. And when they went to battle, they passed by the general one at a time. So as I mentioned before, what are they doing when they're passing by the general? The general is giving them assignments and telling them what it is that they have to do. And this represents the importance, the significance of each individual. That when you have an army, it's made up, there's a swarm of people. It's like a flock, a herd of, a flock is for birds. It's like a herd of sheep, or a herd of lamb. But the difference is that every lamb is the same as the other lamb. They're all the same. You can't even tell the difference between one lamb and the other lamb. Human beings, every human being has his own countenance. The Gemara says, each person looks different. And they'll say, people think differently. That's why there's so many disagreements, because everybody has their own perspective. And this reflects the importance, the third element that I mentioned before. There is unity, tolerance, and respect. This is the element of respect, because respect is a appreciation of the role that the person plays. And you can't, an army needs to have privates, and it needs to have majors, and it needs to have generals, and it needs to have infantry, and it needs all sorts of people in the army in order for it to function properly. And that's how mankind is as well, that everybody is important. Everybody has their contribution, whether it's in terms of economy, but beyond that, in terms of interacting with each other. Everybody has something special, because everybody is a Tzelem Elokim. The Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died. The 20,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva perished between Pesach and, it was 18,000. Between Pesach and Shavuos, 12,000. Between 12,000 pairs, 24,000. They died between Pesach and Shavuos, and the Gemara says because they were not knowing him kavod zelazeh, they didn't treat each other with kavod. That means it doesn't say they didn't have achdus. It doesn't say they didn't love each other, but they didn't respect each other. There was a lack of kavod, and as a result, they died from, the Gemara says they died from askar. They died from some type of disease which leads to the person asphyxiation. The person can't breathe, and because breath is the neshama, and the reason why it's the God put the breath into man, and when they lose their sense of appreciation of the kavod of man, then they lose the appreciation of the value of life. Life is enormously valuable, and therefore they perished by asphyxiation. So that's the third element of this Mishnah, or the third explanation, that every person has their own assignment. There's a terrific story about Tuscanini. I heard it years ago. I'm not sure if it's apocryphal. I Googled it a bunch of times. I only found it in Jewish sources. So I suspect that somebody, well, maybe they read it someplace. I don't know. Maybe it's true. I don't know. I'm not an expert in Tuscanini. Tuscanini was probably the greatest conductor of the earlier part of the 20th century. And he had at the end of his career, there was a biographer that was sitting with him and interviewing him. And Tuscanini told him that he has at 2:00, he has to stop because he's going to hear over the telephone a symphony that's taking place in Italy. And he wants to hear that it was a certain orchestra that he was familiar with. He wanted to hear the symphony. So at 2:00, the biographer puts down his pen and they listen together. After an hour and the symphony's over, Tuscanini says to the biographer, "Did you hear anything strange?" So the biographer says, "No, I thought it was wonderful." So Tuscanini says, "There was one violin missing." So the guy says, "Really?" He says, yes, there were supposed to be 14 violins in the orchestra. There was only 13 violins. There was one missing. So the researcher was incredulous. He thought Toscanini made that up. So the next day, he went and he did his research. He called Italy, and indeed, there was one violinist missing. So he went back to Toscanini. He says, how in the world did you know there was one? There were 14. There were 13 other violinists. How did you know it was one missing? So he said, when you're a conductor, every violin has its role. Every instrument has its role. And that's a terrific mashal for humanity, that we're all part of God's symphony. And the drummer can't play the flute, and the flute can't play the violin, and the violin can't play the drums. And even the violinists, you can't replace one violinist with another. Every violinist, everyone that's playing an instrument has an important role. And that's the symphony of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is everybody has something to contribute. Everybody is important. And that's why human beings have to be treated with respect. So these are the three things that the Mishnah is reflecting. Each one reflects that the dual role of the individual and the tzibur, the sheep as a flock and the sheep as a herd, and then one sheep gets isolated, and the people who have to walk by themselves on the top of the mountaintop, and they slowly rejoin society, or the soldiers that go one at a time, but then they're part of the army. But at the same time, it reflects these three important critical elements of society: to treat other people with respect, to have a sense of achdus, of unity, and to exercise tolerance. Even if you have achdus and kavod, sometimes people do things that are hurtful. So you have to have tolerance, savlanas as well. So if this was the divine plan, that the tremendous division that's been in society for the past few years, and it's escalating, and it keeps on getting worse and worse, and it's like a volcano, the amount of anger and hatred and demonization and polarization. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the pandemic so that people like the Mitzorah, they should be isolated, they should be quarantined, so they should understand how really dependent we are on one another. So did that method fail? Did it accomplish absolutely nothing? So I would say that ostensibly it was not successful, but that's not really the case. It was enormously successful because the Gemara says, Haroa sota bekukula yazer. I just have to find the Gemara. If a person sees a sota, a man and woman that are committing adultery, so then it should become a nazir. So the Gemara says, why? And then I'm sorry, yazer asmani yayin, because the parsha sota is juxtaposed next to the parsha of nazir, of a person who takes an oath not to drink wine. So why are they juxtaposed? The Gemara says they're juxtaposed because if a person sees a couple acting immorally, so then he should take an oath and become a nazir. So here it is. So the question is, why in the world does the sota have to take an oath not to drink wine? He's making an oath because if he becomes intoxicated, it might lead to illicit or frivolous behavior, to an adulterous relationship. So therefore, the person who observes this, he has to become a nazir. He's a tzaddik. He didn't do anything. There's this other couple. They're people that degraded themselves. They're immoral and unethical. So let them become a nazir. Why do I have to become a nazir if I observe a couple who's acting immorally? So there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I would suggest now is that nobody exists in isolation. Everybody is part of society. And if it's possible in a society that people will betray themselves or betray their spouses in a relationship, then that's not only a reflection on that couple, but it's a reflection on the society as a whole. And if people if the rest of society would live in a more elevated manner, then it would impact on even the people that may be the people who are committing crimes that are inappropriate. Maybe they would be elevated as well. And therefore, everybody has to take stock. There's a pasuk that says that the Jewish people, pasuk in Ishaya, that the Jewish people are God makes us a light for the nations of the world. The role of the Jew is to be a light for the rest of society. Our values that we have, they trickle down to the rest of society. And when we interact with people that are not Jewish, not only do we make a Kiddush Hashem if we conduct ourselves in the right way, but it has an impact. If they see, they try to say Lashon Hara to us, and we say, in our religion, we don't speak slanderous, that makes an enormous impact on people. That the refinement of the individual, when they see the type of chesed, the bikur cholim in hospitals, they're blown away when they see my daughter was once in the hospital in Middletown 25 years ago. And in the middle of the afternoon, there was this swarm of Hasidic ladies that came from a bungalow colony nearby to visit the patients in the hospital. So there's enormous chesed and refinement of character that Klal Yisrael has. And that makes an impression on the rest of society. When we see things that are a problem, the response is not our first response should not be, if you see a sota, our first response should not be to say, look at those lowlives. Our first response should be, what could I do better? And if we are living in a society where civility is out the window and there's so much hatred and anger, so that should motivate us to do the exact opposite, to intensify our own efforts, to become more sensitive, to become more caring, to see the good in people, to treat them with enormous respect, and to have greater a sense of achdus and avos Yisrael. That's what we should. When we see the problems that exist in the world, and we see how much churban and destruction it causes, then we have to intensify our efforts in the opposite manner, in the opposite extreme. The two times the word Hineni, or maybe there's more, but two times in Chumash the word Hineni appears. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham, when he tested Avraham and he wanted him to go to the Akedah, Vayomer Elav Avraham, Vayomer Hineni. He spoke to him and he called him as Avram, and Avram says, I'm here. And then when Moshe was standing by the burning bush, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu addressed Moshe, and he said, Vayomer Moshe Moshe, Vayomer Hineni. Moshe said, I am here. The significance of Hineni is that a leader has to be somebody that's always ready to do the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That no matter how difficult and how hard and how many obstacles and whatever it is has to be overcome, if God asks you to do something, so the response should be Hineni. And we, Rabbi Yugreis formed an organization by the name of Hineni because it was part of the philosophy of the organization. We all need to respond Hineni. And it seems to me that if we're living at a time when society as a whole is falling to pieces and it's collapsing, and there's so much demonization and polarization and all the things that I've been discussing, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is waiting for his children, for Klal Yisrael, to move in the opposite direction. As we observe society, people killing each other, literally, then we have to we have to be motivated to move in the exact opposite direction. And if society perhaps missed the message of being quarantined, we should get the message and understand it very well. We all had enormous difficulty being in quarantine. We didn't get to see our children or our grandchildren or our friends. It was an enormously difficult period of time because human beings are like the flocks or the herds of sheep. They have a strong flocking instinct. They need to be together with people. My father, alav shalom, used to say, why was the last Makkah before Makkah's Bechoros the Makkah of Choshech? You would think that the Makkahs were in ascending order of severity. That was the easiest Makkah. Nobody got hurt. Nobody was banged around. There was no wild animals. There was no barad flying down from the hail from the sky. But what was the big deal? The big deal is that nobody saw anybody. That's the greatest torture. If you want to drive a person insane, you put them in solitary confinement. It's considered inhuman torture to put a person in solitary confinement because human beings have it's core to their nature that they have to be part of society. So when we were in isolation, just like the Mitzorah, Badad Yeshev, he had to be separated, so he should have a taste of what it's like to be separated, so that he should be far more sensitive to other people and not malign people and destroy relationships. So we too, sitting in bidud for 2 months, 3 months, and walking around with social distancing and wearing masks, we should also, it should remind us constantly of the importance of relationships and the 3 elements of savlanas, treating people with kavod, and achdus, and avos, which is avos Yisrael. And having gone through the pandemic, we should be saying Inani. And you know, if God wants people to do something, and there's hardly anybody doing it, and there's a few people who stand up and say, God, here I am, Inani, I'll do it. How the reward is so great for that person, because there's not a lot of people responding to the calling. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is calling to us. He's calling to us to respond to what's taking place in society, not by saying, look how terrible society is. I mean, it is terrible. But by saying, what am I going to do to make myself better? How am I going to be more sensitive? How am I going to treat people with greater respect? How am I going to have greater savlanas and tolerance, whether it's in my house or with my friends or in the office? And when a person does that and he cries and he's Inani, I'm here, God, I'm here, I'm ready to go. That's a tremendous thing for the individual. It's a tremendous schus that will serve us well at this time in the Asar Simei Shuva, when we are pleading with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he should grant us a good life in the coming year. Let's hope that in Mitzvah Hashem, everybody should be healthy and well, and there should be shalom in the world. There's very exciting things going on in Israel, peace treaties between Israel and neighbors who were hostile for 70 years, and now it's having a ricochet effect, a domino effect, and the Mitzvah Hashem, it should continue. And maybe one day there'll be even peace with the Palestinians, and there should be shalom in America. We shouldn't have to live with violence. There should be no anarchy, and we should all be healthy and well, and we should all be able to develop the special qualities that each one of us have. Whatever the instrument it is that we're playing in God's symphony, we should play it well, and we should be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say Hineni, answer the call, and HaKadosh Baruch should grant us all a Gemar Chasima Tova. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I appreciate it very much, and have a good year.